The morning sun bled across the horizon like a fresh wound, spilling red light over the crooked roofs of Redemption Creek. Dust hung in the air, heavy and waiting. The whole town had gathered in front of the saloon, cow hands still smelling of whiskey, wives with their arms crossed, drifters leaning against hitching posts, all pretending they weren't curious. The laughter came first, sharp and nervous. Then it faded, replaced by the creak of boots and the murmur of disbelief. Because on that makeshift platform, standing on a wooden crate, was a woman. Not a horse, not a piece of land, not some outlaw's rifle, but a woman and her baby. Her name was Luta. She was Apache, though her skin was lighter than most, her eyes deep and storm dark. A tattered blanket hung around her shoulders, and in her arms she held a baby boy with a face too pale for one world and too dark for the other. His name, she whispered once, was Dakota. The town banker, Royce Kellen, stood beside her, puffed up like a rooster with his hat too clean and his boots too polished. His voice carried through the dusty air. "Gentlemen," he said, "this woman and her child are property of the Flynn estate, as decreed by law. Her husband's debts are considerable, and payment is due. We'll start the bidding at $20. A few men chuckled. One spit tobacco near the crate. Another said, "Ain't worth half that. She's savage blood." Horror. Luta didn't flinch. Her back was straight, her eyes sharp as flint. The baby stirred, pressing his face against her chest. $20, Kellen repeated, scanning the crowd. "Anyone?" A ranch hand with a missing tooth lifted his hand. 25. Laughter followed. Someone else shouted, "Make it 30. Maybe she can cook." The sound of their laughter scraped like iron against stone. The wind picked up, stirring Luta's hair. Long, black, alive with sunlight. For a heartbeat, the whole street seemed to watch it shimmer. Then the bidding turned mean. 35. 40. 45. And I'll take the brat too. Kellen smirked, hammer in hand. Sold. But before he could drop it, a voice cut through the noise. "I'll pay 120 in gold." The crowd went still. Even the horses shifted uneasily, sensing something had changed. From the edge of the square, a tall man stepped forward, hat low, coat dusted with trail dirt, his face unreadable beneath the morning glare. Wade Hollister, owner of the Hollister Ranch, a man known for being fair, quiet, and dangerous when crossed. He stopped in front of the crate. His shadow fell across Luta's bare feet. "The woman and the child," he said evenly. "They come with me." Royce Kellen blinked, mouth open like a fish. "Mr. Hollister, you can't be serious." "I don't make jokes with gold," Wade replied. He reached into his saddlebag, the sound of coins clinking like thunder in the silence. The townsfolk whispered now, not daring to laugh. Why would Hollister buy an Apache widow? Luta stared at him, her eyes full of distrust. Not gratitude, not fear, just the fierce dignity of someone who refuses to bow. Her voice was low, rough from days without water. "You think you can buy what's not yours?" Wade met her gaze. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "I'm paying to stop this disgrace." Kellen, seeing the crowd's mood shift, slammed his hammer down anyway. "Sold! To Mr. Hollister!" The echo rang through the square. Luta held her child tighter, her knuckles white, her eyes locked on Wade's. The sun caught her face then, proud, unbroken, framed in light and dust. Around them, the whispers started again. Some said he'd lost his mind. Some said maybe it was guilt. Others said a man like Hollister didn't save anyone unless he saw something worth saving. Wade turned, leading his horse toward the road that wound out of town. After a moment's hesitation, Luta followed, her bare feet stirring little clouds of dust. Behind them, Redemption Creek watched in silence, because no one there could tell if they had just witnessed an act of mercy or the beginning of a storm. The wagon creaked and rattled along the narrow trail, wheels cutting through dry ruts as the last roofs of Redemption Creek faded behind them. The land stretched wide and silent, a sea of ochre grass bending under the wind, sagebrush rolling like ghosts across the plain. Wade Hollister held the reins steady, his jaw tight beneath the brim of his hat. Beside him sat Luta, her face turned toward the horizon, her arms locked around the bundle that was her child. She hadn't said a word since they left town. Dust rose behind the wagon like smoke. The only sounds were the groan of wood, the snort of the horse, and the faint whimper of Dakota. "Won't be long now," Wade said, his voice rough but careful. "Creek's just a few miles out. We'll water the horse there." Luta didn't answer. Her chin lifted slightly, the line of her jaw hard as stone. After a while, he tried again. "You need something to eat? I've got jerky and bread in the back." "No," she said flatly, her accent faint but sharp. He nodded, chewing the inside of his cheek. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain. Above them, clouds were stacking up thick and gray, bruised by thunder. The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry. "Maybe wrap him tighter," Wade offered. Luta shot him a look, not angry, but fierce enough to silence him. She adjusted the blanket herself, whispering something in Apache, a low rhythm like a song or a prayer. When they reached the creek, Wade pulled the wagon to a stop. The water shimmered faintly under the dimming light. Luta stepped down without asking for help, her bare feet sinking into the cool mud. She crouched by the bank, dipped her hands into the water, and touched it to her forehead, then to her child's. He watched from the wagon, unsure if he was witnessing a prayer or a goodbye. The rain came quick after that, thick drops spattering the dust, turning the air cold. Wade glanced toward the distant hills and spotted a dark outline, an old line shack left from the trail days. "Cabin up ahead," he called. "We'll wait it out there." By the time they reached it, the storm had broken wide open. Lightning cracked the sky apart, thunder rolling over the plains like cannon fire. Wade kicked the cabin door open and led the horse inside the lean-to. Luta followed, clutching Dakota close. The place smelled of wet wood and long abandonment. A broken chair lay in one corner, a pile of ashes in the hearth. Wade knelt beside it, stacking bits of kindling with steady hands. "Sit close," he said. "Fire'll take the chill off." She stayed by the wall, dripping wet, eyes glinting in the firelight as the first spark caught. The baby whimpered again, and she hushed him softly in her language. Lightning flashed, throwing their shadows across the wall. One tall and steady, the other small and crouched, protective. When Wade finally spoke, his voice was low. "You don't have to be afraid. No one's going to hurt you now." Luta looked up from her child. "You don't know that," she said quietly. "White men always say such things before they do." He swallowed, staring into the fire. "Maybe so, but I ain't most men." The rain hammered the roof. A long silence stretched between them. Not empty, just fragile. After a while, Luta spoke again, her English slow, deliberate. "Why did you buy me?" He didn't look at her. "Because no one else should have had the right." She studied him for a moment, searching for deceit. "You think you did?" "No," he said. "I just couldn't stand there watching what they were doing. I've seen enough ugliness to last me 2 lifetimes. Luta's eyes softened, only slightly. The firelight flickered across her cheekbones, revealing a strength that went beyond beauty. The kind forged in loss and silence. She said nothing more. Instead, she shifted closer to the fire, warming the baby's tiny hands above the glow. Wade watched her quietly, understanding, maybe for the first time, that courage didn't always come with noise or guns. Sometimes it looked like a woman holding her child steady in the storm. Outside, the thunder moved farther away, and the rain eased into a whisper against the roof. Inside the cabin, 2 strangers shared warmth for the first time. Not out of trust, not yet, but out of the simple, stubborn will to survive. By the time they reached Hollister Ranch, the morning fog had lifted, revealing a stretch of land that looked too peaceful to belong to this world. The valley opened wide beneath the shadow of the Gallatin Range, where pine trees grew thick and dark like sentinels. Cattle grazed by the creek, and the mountains behind stood tall and silent, their peaks still capped with snow. Wade slowed the wagon as they crossed the small bridge. "That's my place," he said quietly. "Been here near 15 years. Luta said nothing. She sat stiff, her eyes following the barn, the split-rail fences, the wide porch shaded by cottonwoods. It was a good ranch, honest, orderly, solid, the kind of place built by a man who didn't know how to quit. But to her, it was foreign ground. When the wagon stopped, she climbed down carefully, holding Dakota close. Her bare feet met the grass. It felt soft but uncertain beneath her toes. She glanced at the house, its clean windows, the smell of pine soap drifting from the porch. And for the first time since leaving the reservation, she hesitated. Wade noticed. "Go on in," he said gently. "Ain't no one here but me." She shook her head. "You first." He gave a small half-smile, the kind a man wears when he understands he's not trusted yet, and led the way inside. The door creaked open on a tidy parlor. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, falling on the wood floors, polished smooth from years of use. Every object seemed to hum with meaning. A rifle hung above the hearth, its barrel clean to a dull shine. A Bible sat open on the mantel, pages yellowed but well read. Beside it, a photograph. A man and woman standing in front of the same porch, young and proud, their faces steady with the kind of certainty only early settlers had. Wade caught her gaze and said, almost awkwardly, "My folks, both gone now. Mama died 'fore the war. Pa a year after I came back." He cleared his throat and nodded toward the small bedroom down the hall. "You and the boy can take my mother's room. She'd like that it was used again." Luta looked at him, measuring the weight of that offer. She stepped into the room slowly. The scent of lavender and old cedar hung faintly in the air. There was a quilt on the bed, hand-stitched, the colors faded but still warm. She laid Dakota down and pressed her palm to the fabric, feeling the years inside it. Outside the window, she could see Wade in the corral. He moved with quiet precision, checking the fence line, brushing the horses, hauling feed like it was second nature. He wasn't a man who gave orders from a porch. He worked shoulder to shoulder with the dirt. That night, when the wind came down from the pines, she sat by the window holding Dakota. The moonlight touched his tiny face, his lashes dark against his skin. She whispered softly in Apache, her words blending with the rustle of the trees. "We are not prisoners," she murmured, "just ghosts finding a place to rest." The house creaked, settling in the night. Somewhere down the hall, Wade's boots thudded softly as he banked the fire. For the first time in months, there was no shouting, no threat in the dark, only the low hum of the wind, the steady breathing of her child, and the heartbeat of a house that wasn't hers, but didn't yet push her away. Luta sat there a long while, studying the strange stillness around her. A man and a woman under one roof, separated by silence, bound by necessity. No trust yet, no tenderness. But in the quiet, something faint began to stir, like the first flicker of dawn on a cold plain, promising warmth that neither of them would name aloud. The days at Hollister Ranch settled into a quiet rhythm, as if time itself had decided to move softer. The air smelled of pine sap and rain-washed dirt. The creek sang behind the barn, and somewhere beyond the ridge, elk moved like shadows between the trees. Luta began to move through the house, not like a guest, but like someone learning the rhythm of a new world. At first, she spoke little. Then, little by little, her silence became work, her hands finding purpose where her heart still feared to trust. She washed the dishes in the cold creek water and hung them on the fence post to dry. She mended the torn curtain by the window, patched Wade's work shirts, and chopped vegetables for stew in the evenings. The sound of her knife against the cutting board became as steady as the tick of the mantel clock. At night, when Dakota began to fuss, she would hum soft Apache lullabies, low and sweet, songs shaped by the desert wind. Wade had never heard anything like them. He would pause on the porch, pipe in hand, listening through the open door, her voice like smoke winding through the cabin, ancient and alive. Sometimes he caught himself smiling. One morning, Wade brought out his gentlest mare, a pale buckskin named Daisy. "She's calm," he said, resting his hand on the saddle. "She'll walk slow for you." Luta looked at him, skeptical. "She walks for you, not for me." He laughed quietly. "Then we'll see if she listens to both of us." She learned quick. Her posture was firm, her balance perfect. Within a week, she could guide Daisy across the pasture with nothing but a nudge of her knees. When she laughed, really laughed, the sound startled even her. In return, she began teaching him Apache words. "Yota," she said one evening, pointing to the sky streaked orange with sunset. "Wind." "Toe," she added, motioning to the creek. "Water." Then she pressed her hand to her chest. "Sha," she said. "Forgiveness." He repeated it, his rough voice stumbling over the soft syllables. Shah. Luta smiled faintly. Close enough. Their silences changed after that. They were no longer walls between them, but a kind of shelter. Two broken souls resting in the same quiet, learning how to breathe again. But peace in places like Redemption Creek was fragile as a spider's web. By the second week, word began to spread. It started at the general store, then slipped through the saloon, then down to the livery. Hollister's got himself a squaw living under his roof, they said. Figures. Man's been too long alone. Bet he's gone soft. Suck it to him. The gossip traveled faster than the wind. When Wade rode into town for feed, men snickered behind their cigars. The storekeeper's wife avoided his eyes. And one evening, as he left the blacksmith's, someone spat at his boots. He said nothing, just kept walking. But when he came home that night, the weight of it hung on him like rain. Luta sensed it before he said a word. She was standing by the stove, stirring stew. They talk about you, she said quietly. About me. Wade leaned against the doorframe, hat in hand. I know. She turned, her face unreadable. Maybe I should go. You owe me nothing. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he stepped closer, the firelight painting his face in amber and shadow. You didn't bring shame here, he said softly. You brought life. The words settled between them, heavier than the silence that followed. Luta looked down at the sleeping child in the cradle by the fire. Her hand trembled as she brushed a strand of hair from her face. Outside, the night wind moved through the pines, carrying the sound of the creek and the far-off call of a coyote. Inside, for the first time, she believed him. By late summer, the valley had turned gold again. The hayfields shimmered under the sun, and the pine-scented wind carried laughter from the town of Whitefish Creek down the trail. The Founders' Festival came once a year, part harvest, part holiday, part excuse for the townsfolk to forget their troubles. That morning, Wade saddled his horse and brushed the dust from his hat. We should go, he said, standing by the porch where Luta was washing Dakota's blanket. It's good for the boy to see folks. There'll be music, food, games. Luta looked up wary. Your people do not want to see mine. They'll have to get used to it, he said quietly. She hesitated, eyes drifting toward the horizon where the church steeple rose faintly above the trees. If I go, it's for my son, Wade nodded. Then that's reason enough. By the time they reached town, the streets were strung with bunting. Fiddles played from the bandstand, and the smell of roasted corn and sweet cider filled the air. Luta carried Dakota on her hip, her other hand clutching the hem of a simple calico dress borrowed from Clara Mayfield. Around her neck hung a string of turquoise beads, their color as bright as mountain sky. When they stepped into the square, conversation stopped for a heartbeat. Then the whispers began. That's her. The Apache woman from Hollister's ranch. He brought her here? Bold man, that Wade. Luta felt the heat of their eyes, the sting of judgment cutting through the warm afternoon. She kept her chin high, her face calm, though her heart beat fast beneath the cotton fabric. Wade beside her acted as if he didn't hear them. He introduced her to the shopkeeper, nodded to the preacher, bought Dakota a piece of molasses candy. When she hesitated, he said, Let 'em talk. They can't hurt what's already been earned. Then the music started, a reel, lively, and full of joy. Wade turned to her. You dance, Luta? She shook her head. Not like this. Then I'll teach you. Before she could protest, his hand found hers. Rough, steady, certain. He led her into the circle of dancers under the shade of the cottonwoods. The fiddles cried, boots stomped, skirts twirled. Luta's steps were hesitant at first, her bare feet uncertain on the packed dirt. But Wade's hand anchored her, guiding her through the rhythm. And then, for a fleeting moment, something broke free inside her. She laughed, not softly but full and real, the kind of laughter that hadn't lived in her chest since before her world burned. The crowd's noise faded. For that brief dance, she forgot the stares, the whispers, the past. The song ended, and the two stood breathless in the fading light, smiling like they'd discovered something neither dared name. That's when the voice came, cold, honey smooth, laced with familiarity. Didn't think I'd live to see you dancing with one of them. Wade turned, Standing a few steps away was June Carter. Blonde, elegant, and wearing the kind of confidence that came from knowing she still owned a piece of the past. Her gaze slid over Luta like a blade. "She's lovely, Wade," June said, the words dripping with poison. "Your charity's improved, I see." The laughter around them died. Luta froze, her fingers still tangled in the edge of Wade's coat. The warmth of the dance vanished, replaced by the sting of shame and something sharper. Betrayal. She looked at him, waiting for him to speak, to defend her. But Wade said nothing. His jaw tightened, his eyes fixed somewhere between the dust and the horizon. Luta stepped back. The distance between them widened, invisible but real. She turned without a word, taking Dakota into her arms and walking toward the edge of the crowd. The fiddles started again, but the sound felt hollow now. Wade watched her go, guilt coiling like barbed wire in his chest. He wanted to follow, to tell her the words she deserved, that she belonged, that her laughter was worth more than the town's approval. But pride and silence, old Western habits, held him still. The sun dipped behind the pines, casting long shadows over the square. Luta's turquoise beads caught the last light before she disappeared into the street. And though the music played on, Wade Hollister had never felt the world so quiet. 3 days after the festival, winter came early to the Gallatin Valley. The wind rolled down from the high ridges with a voice like an old wolf, cold and wild. Wade saddled his horse before dawn, pulling on his sheepskin coat. "Fence line north down again," he said, buckling his gloves. "I'll be back before dark." Luta stood at the doorway, Dakota on her hip. Her eyes searched his face as though reading a sign the sky had hidden. "Snow comes fast today," she warned. He smiled faintly. "I've seen worse. Keep the fire going." By mid-afternoon, the clouds gathered heavy and mean. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Snow began to fall, not gentle flakes, but hard pellets that stung the skin. Luta waited. She fed the fire, rocked her child, listened for the sound of hoofbeats. Dusk bled across the valley, and still he didn't return. The lamps flickered as if the wind itself was breathing inside the walls. By full dark, the snow was a white curtain outside the window. She stood, her jaw set. She wrapped Dakota in layers of fur, tied him close against her chest. Then she threw on her buffalo hide cloak, pulled Wade's spare saddle from the barn, and let out the old roan mare. The horse snorted at the wind, but Luta's voice, low, calm, steadied it. No one would have blamed her for staying, but something inside her refused. The storm swallowed the world in gray. Trees bent under ice. The trail vanished beneath her. She leaned low in the saddle, her hair whipping against her face, whispering to the horse in Apache between gusts of wind. "Find him. Find the one who brought us home." Hours passed. The snow thickened, erasing direction and mercy. Then, through the blur of white, she saw it. Hoof prints half buried near a ravine. She followed them, heart pounding. At the edge of the hollow, she found him. Wade Hollister lay half covered in snow, one arm twisted beneath him, his horse nowhere in sight. His coat was stiff with ice, his face ghost pale. For a moment, fear rooted her where she sat. Then she slid off the mare, stumbling through the drifts. "Wade!" she shouted, shaking him. "Wake up!" A faint breath clouded the air. He was alive. Luta dragged him inch by inch to a thicket at the ravine's base where a fallen pine had left a hollow. Her hands were raw, her arms burning. She tore branches for cover, built a small fire with flint from his saddlebag, and pressed his body close to the heat. She bound the gash on his leg with strips torn from her cloak, whispering prayers in her language between gasps. "The wind listens," she murmured. "The spirits listen. Let him wake." The hours bled together. Storm, fire, heartbeat. By dawn, the wind had gentled. Snow shimmered under a sky washed clean. Wade stirred, blinking against the dim light. His first sight was Luta, asleep beside the fire. Dakota nestled in her arms. Her hair was dusted with snow, her face turned toward the child, peace softening every line. He watched her for a long moment before trying to speak. His voice was barely a whisper. Why'd you risk your life for me?" Her eyes opened slowly. She looked at him, not with pride, not with anger, but with that quiet steadiness that had marked her since the day he met her. "Because," she said softly, "you never looked at me the way they did." The fire cracked, sending a warm glow across their faces. Outside, the world lay hushed and new. The storm had passed, leaving only the marks of what it had taken and what it had spared. Snow had swallowed the Gallatin Valley for 3 straight days. The world outside lay buried under a white hush, the kind of silence that makes even memory feel small. Inside the cabin, the fire glowed steady, painting the walls in shades of gold and amber. Wade sat near the hearth, his leg bandaged, his shoulders wrapped in a wool blanket. The lines on his face looked deeper now, not just from pain, but from something heavier he hadn't yet spoken. Luta sat across from him, brushing the last ash from Dakota's blanket. The child slept by the fire, his little chest rising and falling in the rhythm of peace. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the logs and the whisper of snow against the window. Finally, Wade broke the silence. "You saved my life." She didn't look up. "So did you once." He shook his head. "Not like that. You rode into hell for me. Most folks wouldn't have done that, not after the things I've done." Her eyes lifted, calm but curious. "Things?" He stared into the flames as if the truth might burn there. "During the war, I rode with the cavalry. Arizona Territory. They called it peacekeeping, but it was killing. Apache camps, women, children." His words came slow, halting, like stones pulled from deep mud. "I told myself I was following orders, but that don't wash clean, does it?" The fire popped sharply, and Dakota stirred in his sleep. Luta's face softened, though her eyes glistened. She rose from her chair and stood near the hearth, her figure outlined by the firelight. Strong, still, unbroken. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then quietly, "My husband died because of soldiers like you." The words hung heavy in the air, honest and bare. Wade flinched but didn't look away. She knelt by the fire, her voice low but steady. "I've carried anger long enough to poison every breath I take. But when the storm came, I didn't think of that. I thought of the man who fixed the fences with his own hands, who fed my child when I had nothing. The man who looked at me and saw a person, not a burden, not a wound." Her gaze met his, fierce and luminous. "You can't change what you were, Wade Hollister, but you can choose what kind of man you'll be tomorrow." He swallowed hard, his eyes wet with something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Slowly, as if afraid the moment might shatter, he reached for her hand. Her fingers trembled when they met his, warm, rough, human. The firelight caught the faint scar on his knuckle, the thin gold of her turquoise bracelet, 2 lives stitched together by accident and mercy. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he whispered. Luta shook her head gently. "Forgiveness isn't earned. It's given, or it's lost." The cabin seemed to breathe with them. The snow outside thickened, muffling the world until only the fire's pulse remained. Wade leaned closer, his breath slow, his hand still holding hers. When their lips met, it wasn't a kiss born of sudden passion, but of recognition. 2 souls who'd been walking alone too long, finding warmth in the same fragile light. It was tender, trembling, unsure, and yet certain in the way a spark knows it's meant to become flame. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we start new." Wade closed his eyes, letting the words settle deep inside him. Tomorrow. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless. Inside, the fire burned low but steady, like forgiveness itself, refusing to die. By midwinter, the Gallatin Valley was a quilt of white and silver. Snow lay deep on the fence rails, the river frozen beneath a crust of ice, and the sky wore that pale blue stillness only found after a storm. The world outside slept, but inside the Hollister ranch, life began to stir again. The cabin had changed. Where once it held only echo and dust, it now carried warmth, the smell of coffee, stew, and pine wood smoke. Luta hung bundles of dried sage near the hearth, the scent mingling with the oak logs that cracked and spat in the fire. Wade had patched the draft in the west window, hung new curtains, and built something that made him smile every time he looked at it. A cradle. He'd carved it himself from old pine boards, smoothing the edges with his calloused hands. When he brought it inside, Luta's eyes softened. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. Wade shrugged, suddenly shy. Figured the boy ought to have something made by hand, not just borrowed from the past. She ran her fingers along the wood, tracing the grooves. Later, while Dakota napped, she painted delicate feather patterns along its sides, white, red, and turquoise. Each stroke careful, reverent. When she was done, she whispered something in Apache and tied a tiny charm of deer bone and leather to the headboard. "It's for protection," she said. "Then he's got the strongest guard in Montana," Wade replied, and she laughed softly. That rare, low laugh that warmed him more than any fire could. Evenings became their world. When the light faded, they'd sit near the fire. Luta stitching, Wade reading from his mother's worn Bible, or an old book of frontier tales. She taught him Apache words for things that didn't exist in English. The way the wind sounds when it carries a memory. The name for the color of dawn when it hits red rock. In return, he taught her how to cook cornbread, how to mend a saddle, how to read simple sentences from his childhood primer. Their days turned slow, like the rhythm of a lullaby. Dakota grew strong, learning to crawl across the cabin floor with a determination that made Wade laugh aloud. There were moments when it felt like the outside world no longer existed. Just the three of them, a small family carved out of the wilderness. But beyond their fences, whispers grew teeth. First, two ranch hands quit without a word. Then at the general store, Wade caught the tail end of a sneer. "Man don't know shame, living with an Apache under his roof." The preacher in town gave a sermon not long after, about mixing what the Lord never meant to join. Shari. The words reached him like cold wind through a crack in the wall. That Sunday morning, when Luta asked if they'd go to church, Wade shook his head. Not this time. She understood without asking why. That night, as snow fell thick again, Wade sat by the window, whittling a scrap of wood while Luta rocked Dakota to sleep. The firelight flickered over his face, sharp in places, softened in others. "They'll keep talking," she said quietly. He nodded. "Let 'em." She looked at him for a long time, waiting for anger that never came. He finally set the carving down and met her eyes. "Let them talk, Luta. I'll build my life on truth, not gossip." For a moment, silence hung between them, not the cold kind, but one full of trust. She smiled faintly, the firelight catching in her dark eyes. "Then I'll stand beside you." Outside, the wind swept across the frozen valley. Inside, the cradle creaked softly as Dakota dreamed, the painted feathers gleaming in the glow. And though the world beyond their windows might never understand, within those walls something stronger than scorn had taken root. The quiet, defiant shape of love that needed no approval to exist. The wind rose again over Hollister Ranch, shaking the shutters and howling across the white hills. The storm came sudden and mean, as Montana storms often did, sweeping the valley clean, wrapping the world in snow and silence. Inside, the fire burned high. The smell of cedar smoke and stew filled the cabin. Luta sat near the hearth, sewing a patch into Wade's coat while Dakota slept in his cradle, his tiny hand clutching a feather charm. Wade paced for a time, restless. His eyes kept drifting toward a small velvet pouch he'd set on the mantel that morning. It had belonged to his mother. He'd carried it through the war, through the years of loneliness that followed, but he'd never opened it since she died. Tonight felt different. The storm's moan deepened, pressing against the walls. Finally, he took the pouch down, thumb tracing its worn edge. "Luta," he said softly. She looked up, her dark hair glinting orange in the firelight. "Yes?" He hesitated, a man more comfortable with fences and horses than feelings. Then he crossed the room and knelt before her, the pouch held gently in his rough hands. "I don't have fine words," he said, voice low, "but I've got this." He untied the string and drew out a gold ring. Simple, old, warm from his touch. "It was my mother's," he went on. "She wore it till the day she passed, said it meant home. I figured, maybe it's time I gave it one again." Luta froze. The fire popped, sending sparks upward. Her heart thudded hard in her chest. He looked up at her, steady but humble. Not asking, not demanding, just offering. "I don't want to take you from your people, Wade said. "I just want you to know, my home is yours if you want it." The room seemed to still. The storm outside pressed against the roof like a great animal breathing, and the firelight flickered between them. Gold, fragile, alive. Luta's throat tightened. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they touched the ring. The metal was smooth, carrying the warmth of the man who'd held it. Tears filled her eyes. Not of weakness, but of something long buried and finally free. "You don't own me, Wade Hollister," she whispered. Her voice was soft but unyielding, like the sound of wind through canyon stone. "But I choose to stay." He nodded slowly, a small, grateful smile rising at the corner of his mouth. "That's all I ever wanted," he said. "Your choice." Luta slipped the ring onto a leather cord and tied it around her neck. "It will rest close to my heart," she said quietly. For a long time, they simply sat there. Two souls who had wandered far, finding at last a place where the world could no longer touch them. Then Wade leaned forward, his hand brushing against hers. The kiss that followed was gentle, hesitant at first, the kind born not of passion, but of peace. Outside, the wind screamed and rattled the eaves. Yet within those walls, everything was still. The fire crackled, the cradle creaked softly, and snow began to pile against the door. They would face the world again come morning. The stares, the whispers, the struggle of a love not built to survive such a place. But tonight, under the storm's song, Wade Hollister and Luta of the Red Mesa were exactly where they belonged. And for the first time in a long while, both believed in forever. Winter broke like a long-held breath. The snow receded first along the fences, then the hillsides, and finally the creek itself, its icy skin cracking open to let the water sing again. For the first time in months, the valley smelled of wet earth and pine sap. Life returned quietly without ceremony, as if it had only been waiting for permission. Luta rose with the sun now. She worked in the garden patch behind the cabin, her hands dark with soil, her hair glinting copper under the morning light. She'd coaxed green from the ground where months before only snow had lain. Beans, wild onions, and sage. Beside her, Dakota toddled through the grass, chasing dandelion seeds and laughing at the wind. From the barn came the sound of Wade's hammer. He was mending the west fence, the rhythm steady and sure. Sometimes he'd hum under his breath, one of Luta's Apache lullabies, the tune soft and imperfect, but real. When she called him in for supper, he'd tease, "You've got me singing your songs, woman," and she'd smile. Then maybe the wind finally carries your heart right. Their days passed in small, beautiful patterns. Evenings by the fire, shared meals, quiet prayers spoken in two languages. The ranch no longer felt like a place haunted by silence. It felt alive, woven together by laughter, labor, and the sound of Dakota's small feet against the floorboards. But peace in a town like Whitefish Creek was never left alone. Rumors softened into grudging respect, and then into uneasy silence. When the young daughter of the blacksmith fell ill with fever, the doctor was 2 days right away. Desperation brought the girl's mother to their door. "Please," the woman begged. "They say you know herbs." Luta didn't hesitate. She brewed teas of willow bark and sage, pressed cool claws to the girl's forehead through the night, and whispered old songs meant to call strength back to the body. By dawn, the fever broke. When the doctor finally arrived, he found the girl already sleeping peacefully. Word spread faster than any sermon. The same people who once spat her name began to nod in quiet greeting when they passed her on the road. The preacher's wife brought a basket of apples. Even the storekeeper tipped his hat when Wade came in for supplies. Wade said little about it, but Luta saw the change in his eyes, a light that hadn't been there before, a peace earned not through defiance, but through grace. One evening, when the last snow melted from the ridge, Wade saddled the horses and helped Luta mount. They rode together toward the western bluff, Dakota tucked against her in a wool blanket. The sun hung low, gold spilling across the valley. The world around them washed in spring's first warmth. When they reached the top, the land opened wide beneath them, endless and alive. Luta looked over it all, the past and present bound together in that view. Her voice was soft, carried on the wind. "Once," she said, "they sold me like a thing. Now I know what freedom feels like." Wade turned toward her, his face etched with quiet pride. "Freedom's only real," he said, "when it's shared." They sat there for a while, hand in hand, the child between them, the horses grazing in the grass. The mountains blazed in the dying light, their peaks catching fire in the sunset. Behind them lay the dust of all they had endured, the cruelty, the judgment, the long winters of the soul. Before them stretched a world still wild, still uncertain, but theirs. The widow and the rancher stood together on the ridge, the west behind them, the future ahead, their love a quiet rebellion against the world that once tried to break them. And as the creek sang below, and the wind carried her lullaby through the pines, the first stars of spring rose over Hollister Ranch, marking the beginning of everything yet to come.